This is All India Radio. In the program SAMVAAD, we now bring you a special interview of Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman with DD News, followed by a press statement by RBI Governor.
Madam Minister, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Before we get to the substantive issues at hand, Minister, I just wanted to seek your comments on a couple of issues. One, your reaction, how do you see the RBI decision, and also how did your meeting with the chiefs of public sector banks go?
The RBI decision, not just this one, even earlier, have been very timely, well thought through, and made a lot of difference then, and I guess even now will make a lot of difference to the sentiment which prevails, and also immediately make affordable liquidity available. And also the extension of the moratorium is something which all of us have waited for, and I only welcome the decision of the RBI. Like the last time, this time too, timely and purpose-serving. So yes, that's about the RBI. I must say that the meeting with the public sector banks has also been very good. I first of all will have to again say what I mentioned to them, that in implementing the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, which was an announcement made within 1.5-2 days after the lockdown was announced, the entire responsibility in the cash transfers, particularly to the aged senior citizens, the Divyang and so on, widows in the remotest part of the country, were to be done by the public sector banks. And at that time, the coronavirus was in its full intensity. It hasn't receded even now, but at that time everybody was scared. But particularly the public sector banks have moved, and after all the government schemes are implemented through them. They moved far and wide, made sure the bank mitras would go. Not one day did we receive any complaint that the banks have shut, they've not attended to the customers and so on. So even at that time, honoring social distancing, I must give it to the credit of the public sector banks for having done a splendid job in reaching and making possible the PM Garib Kalyan. So now, with that same spirit, this package that we have come up on the 5 days we've announced, partial guarantee, 100% guarantee for all enterprises, are all things which banks will have to do. And I was very reassured that the banks spoke in a very positive way. If they had a doubt, the secretaries were with me. We've explained it all to them. So yes, that meeting went off very well.
We had an assessment from the RBI about the state of the Indian economy. For the very first time, the outlook for the growth has been very clear, and it has been put out by the governor that the growth rate for this fiscal year will be into negative territory. How do you assess the impact on different sectors? Because services are looking the most affected at this point in time, and also manufacturing of late will be less affected because of the opening of the lockdown. The only bright spot as of now is the agriculture sector. Ma'am, how do you respond to this?
For me, the announcement probably reflects the fact that we are still in a lockdown. The lockdown is not completely lifted. The last announcement has removed a lot of restrictions, made it easy for some starting or restarting. So the lockdown effectively is still not completely lifted out, one. And second, we really do not know if this pandemic is on a retreat or not. Is it going away? Or is it going to rebound? Is it going to occur again? And if it is going to occur again, God forbid, but when is that going to recur? So I think the seriousness of the uncertainties are very clearly in everybody's mind. Each one of us want to restore some kind of normalcy, but the fact that the 2 months sort of hit us so badly, the RBI's observations are reflective of that. I can understand that. And so, for the question that how do you see it? I see it as lockdown being in place even now. I see it also that there's no reprieve from the coronavirus yet. Although I think we all have learned to live with it to an extent. But of course we have to be prepared that it doesn't reoccur. So with all this done, the economy and its restart, we can give all these packages, but it still means workers have to get back to work. Are they all going to be migrant, or are they going to be local workers substituting for the migrant workers? And when the workers come back, how is it that the companies are going to readjust with them? So there are lots of questions of adjustment, of restarting. So we'll have to wait for it. I will keep all my options open so that the next 10 months goes with a reassurance that the government is there ready to help.
Let's now talk, if you will, Minister, about the Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is Hindi for Self-Reliant India. Now, you spoke about Garib Kalyan Yojana, the MGNREGA, Ayushman Bharat. You also spoke about sectorally, for instance, MSME, banking, housing, defense, aviation, and the list goes on and on. But what's the philosophy behind this package, behind this campaign, and when can one see its full impact before our very own eyes?
Well, the philosophy is the world being what it is now, post-corona, India being a large, diverse country, and the economic well-being is again also so diverse. We have a very large chunk of a population still not above the poverty line. So if we have to keep all this in mind, we have to be self-reliant. Many of what we now import should be possibly made within the country. But that doesn't mean that we are saying we are going to be inward looking. That doesn't mean that we say we don't want anything at all from outside. We'll still have to import those intermediary goods which help us produce both for the country itself and also for exports. And also, we still have to export because many of our goods today find excellent markets outside. We still have to help them. We still have to make them capture new markets. So in order to make sure that all our exporters are getting into some global value chain in a far more competitive manner, we still need to give them the strengths of the economy. Better policy consistency, predictability of policy, making sure your taxation system is simple and easy to comply with. So such things which create a better environment for a manufacturer or a goods provider or a service provider will have to be created. So benefits are not always in cash. If you really think in terms of somebody who wants to invest in a business and grow in this country, the compliance burden really bothers them. Then the uncertainty in policy bothers them. The fear of taxation and the compliance and the related harassment bothers them. So we'll have to take care of all that.
There is a huge impact on the demand, both for consumption demand as well as the investment demand. People are not coming out actually to buy stuff, and that's why there is a serious impact on the consumption. On the other hand, people are sitting on the cash, they are not investing into the economy. Now you have come up with a huge liquidity support for the economy. How will you reassure the economy that people should come forward to actually invest into the domestic sector and actually help reviving this current state of economy?
People quickly assess the package and say, no, it takes care of the supply side. You've not done anything for the demand side. After all, if you give money for enterprises which have to restart their business, will that money be kept only, this is supply side money? It will after all go into the hands of their workers. It will also go for purchasing raw materials. They also demand. And that way it triggers another company's production. It triggers another company to receive some money to pay their own. So the creation of demand is not so watertight is my feeling. So the way in which we've designed the package is you would give immediate help to all those who need additional capital, additional term loans and so on, cash, in order to kickstart the economy. And I think it will benefit both the demand and the supply side. That in turn will generate a lot of market for goods and services. But as regards the investment climate is something which, as I said, is going to be more driven by policy, and for which the announcement on reforms are all aimed at making sure this becomes an opportunity for India to make a lot of things which have been waiting, to get out of regulation, to get out of stifling policy, to get those producers, whether they are farmers or anybody else, a lot more liberated so that they can choose where they want to sell. So that is why the package was deliberately thought through, that it's giving immediate benefit and also bringing in the ease of doing business. So that at least post-COVID, India becomes a better place to do your business. So some people can observe you're spending on medium and long-term issues rather than. All that is important.
Amplify Ajay's point, Minister. Prime Minister Modi in his speech spoke about a couple of issues, including vocal for local. He spoke about wanting a quantum jump. He is not happy with a quote-unquote incremental change. He spoke about the 5 pillars: economy, infrastructure, technology-driven system, demography and demand. So the question people are asking is, will these structural reforms lead to a quick transition to a new post-COVID economic order? How hopeful are you of this quick transition?
I'm hopeful of the quick transition because a lot of work in terms of speaking, consulting, taking stakeholders on board have all happened earlier. And that is why many of them also observe, saying, oh, this is nothing new. You've been talking about it even pre-COVID. Yes, pre-COVID, the groundwork was done. Nobody anticipated a COVID. But we did do a lot of work, and which would have anyway taken its own due time. Now we are saying, we did all the work. Why should it take all the due time? Get going with it now. If farmers can be freed from all the shackles that they are bound by, and it's quite a favorite now for me to repeat it. Was it the chief economist or somebody who told me that the restriction on farmers selling his produce was laid during the Khilji dynasty? And more than 1,200 years have passed since the Khilji dynasty. And post that, even the British didn't touch it. British also, in spite of the famine, the Bengal famine, in spite of all that, never thought of liberating the Indian farmer. They left him to die. I thank Prime Minister Modi for having taken this decision, for having seen through this whole thing, that unless the farmer, who irrespective of the monsoon, failure, drought, no irrigation, dry land, fatigue land, which has been put so much of pesticides and fertilizers, the land is not itself anymore. It's all fertilizer, excess pesticide. In spite of all this, if our Indian farmer is performing, why shouldn't he be given the freedom to choose who he wants to sell to? Honestly, this was one daring decision of the Prime Minister, well worth and well deserved, and it's been waiting for a long time. This is what I think people will now understand, and therefore quickly move to give that benefit to the farmer. Otherwise, you're denying the farmer. There's no ideological dispute on this.
Prime Minister Modi himself has said that the corona crisis has an opportunity and a message for the country. Now, in that context, there are many commentators who say that the global supply chain might be tempted to diversify the basket away from some countries, namely China, to other countries, including India, South Korea or Vietnam. So, in that context, some would say this is a now or never opportunity. An American diplomat says India has a golden opportunity. In that context, how sanguine are you that these structural reforms will actually incentivize those corporates or companies avenues outside of these traditional markets?
The steps that are being taken now are deep reforms. They're not cosmetic. And they are deep in the sense that in many ways untouched governance areas have been taken up, and not just blindly that one, but anything around it, on either side of it, have also been thought through. So it's not going to be you've done that, but you actually didn't do this which should have been done before it, and as a result, that which you did is meaningless. That stage will not come. I'll take an example. When we talked about PM Jan Dhan Yojana, the direct benefit transfer which came after that, and for the direct benefit transfer, the Aadhaar which came before it. So if you look at the sequencing, that at a time, emergency of this nature, if we hadn't had PM Jan Dhan Yojana in place, and if we hadn't really trimmed the Aadhaar without any of those weeds which infesting it, and if we hadn't propagated and implemented it to the last, no one imagined that we'd have a situation like today. But when we have unfortunately got it, without much of a pain, when we were able to transfer the money to the people directly, the whole world is looking at us. There are some advanced economies which wanted to do this, but also candidly admitted that they didn't have the instrumentality or the institutional mechanism for it. And that's where I think the sequencing of events, the steps that you take for reform, all of them will have to be completely thought through. I will talk political for a minute. The Congress party often tries to tell you, oh, this Aadhaar is our scheme. You only implemented it. I want to say, if it was indeed their scheme, why didn't they give it a legislative backing? Why didn't they implement it in such a way that it could be coming off use in a big way? Similarly, if Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Scheme was something which they brought in, you would know the CAG's report on the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It was infested with cronyism, absent, ghost workers' names put. All that came out in CAG's report. Now look at it. Since it's Aadhaar seeded, there's not one argument or case allegation against some misgivings out here. In this state something is going wrong, or in that state something else is happening. You may design a scheme and bring it, but if you really don't follow it through with proper implementation and also make sure that there is no fraudulent practice in between, there's no point in claiming credit. Another, which is very favorite for me to respond and also quote, public sector banks were formed. Nationalization of banking happened 40 years ago. How many poor had accounts in the banks? After all, it was for eradicating poverty. You wanted to make sure the banks worked for the poor. But within 5 years, near coverage, 99% of all the poor have got the accounts. So it's all right. You can have schemes and schemes and schemes.
Thank you so much for making time for us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now we will listen to RBI Governor's press briefing.
I would like to begin with a quote from the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, and I quote, "It is when the horizon is the darkest and human reason is beaten down to the ground that faith shines brightest and comes to our rescue. As a nation, we must have faith in India's resilience and capacity to overcome all odds." COVID-19, a virus of the size of 0.12 microns, has crippled the global economy with more than 300,000 dead and economic activity across the world stalled. Once again, central banks have to answer the call to the front line in defense of the economy. The recent release of macroeconomic data that for the first time revealed the damage wrought by COVID-19 brought forward the need for an off-cycle meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, that is the MPC, in lieu of the earlier scheduled meeting between June 3rd to 5th, 2020. Over the last 3 days, the MPC reviewed the domestic and global developments and their implications for the outlook. After extensive discussions, the MPC voted unanimously for a reduction in policy repo rate and for maintaining the accommodative stance of monetary policy as long as necessary to revive growth and to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 while ensuring that inflation remains within the target. On the quantum of reduction, the MPC voted with 5:1 majority to reduce the policy repo rate by 40 basis points. 40 basis points from 4.4% to 4%. Consequently, the MSF rate and the bank rate now stand reduced to 4.25% and reverse repo rate stands reduced to 3.35%. Now I'd like to provide an assessment of the current macroeconomic situation, both global and domestic. By all counts, the macroeconomic and financial conditions are austere. The global economy is inexorably headed into recession. The global manufacturing PMI contracted in April 2020. The global services PMI recorded its steepest decline in the history of the index. Among advanced economies that have released GDP readings for Q1 of 2020, contractions were in the range of 3.4% to 14.2%. For emerging market economies, the growth rate ranged between 2.9% and minus 6.8%. EMEs face additional pressures in the form of capital outflows and asset price volatility from the bouts of turbulence afflicting financial markets. The plunge in crude prices has dried up budgetary revenues for oil exporters. On the other hand, oil importers have been denied terms of trade gains by the crushing blow to demand delivered by the pandemic. According to the UNCTAD, the value of global trade contracted by 3% in Q1. The volume of world trade can shrink by 13 to 32% in the current year as projected by the WTO. Global financial markets have calmed after a turbulent period in March and volatility has ebbed, but markets have generally been disconnected from the developments in the real economy. Relatively unsung, global policy response by central banks and governments has been unprecedented. Let me now turn to the domestic developments. Domestic economic activity has been impacted severely by the 2 months lockdown. The top 6 industrialized states in India that account for 60% of our industrial output, they are largely in the red and orange zones. High-frequency indicators point to a collapse in demand beginning in March 2020 across both urban and rural segments. Electricity and petroleum consumption, which are indicators of day-to-day demand, have plunged into steep declines. The double whammy in terms of losses of both demand and production has in turn taken its toll on fiscal revenues. Investment demand has virtually been halted by a decline of 36% in the production of capital goods in March, which was coincident with a contraction of 27% in imports of capital goods in March and 57.5% in April. This is also evident in a fall of 91% in finished steel consumption in April and 25% shrinkage in cement production during March. The biggest blow from COVID-19 has been to private consumption, which accounts for about 60% of the domestic demand. The production of consumer durables fell by 33% in March 2020, accompanied by a 16% decline in output of non-durables. Similar indications are reflected in surveys of the fast-moving consumer space also. In the production sectors, industrial production shrank by close to 17% in March, with manufacturing activity down by 21%. The output of core industries, which constitutes about 40% of overall industrial production, contracted by 6.5%. In conformity, the manufacturing PMI for April recorded its sharpest deterioration to 27.4, spread across all sectors. The services PMI plunged to an all-time low of 5.4% in April 2020. Amidst this encircling gloom, agriculture and allied activities have, however, provided a beacon of hope on the back of an increase of 3.7% in food grain production to a new record. A ray of hope also comes from the forecast of normal southwest monsoon by the India Meteorological Department. By 10th May 2020, up to which the latest information is available, Kharif sowing was higher by 44% compared to the last year's acreage. Rabi procurement is in full flow in respect of oilseeds, pulses, wheat, benefiting the bumper harvest. These developments will support farm incomes, improve the terms of trade facing the farm sector and strengthen food security for the country. Going forward, these would also have a salutary effect on food price pressures. The inflation outlook has become complicated by the release of partial information on the Consumer Price Index by National Statistics Organization, obscuring a comprehensive assessment of the price situation. From the incomplete data that have been made available, food inflation, which had eased from its January 2020 peak for next 2 months, that is during February and March, now suddenly they have reversed and surged to 8.6% in April. Supply disruptions took their toll, immune to the ongoing demand compression. Prices of vegetables, pulses, oilseeds, milk and cereals emerged as pressure points. In the external sector, India's merchandise exports and imports suffered their worst slump in the last 30 years as COVID-19 paralyzed world production and demand. India's merchandise exports plunged by 60.3% in April, while imports contracted by 58.6%. India's foreign exchange reserves have, however, increased by 9.2 billion during 2021, that is from 1st April onwards. And so far, that is up to 15th of May, our forex reserves, they stand at $487 billion, which is equivalent to 1 year's imports. I now go to the outlook with regard to inflation and growth. Against this backdrop, the MPC assessed that inflation outlook is highly uncertain. The supply shock to food prices in April may show persistence over the next few months, depending upon the state of lockdown and the time taken to restore the supply chains after relaxation of the lockdown. Among the pressure points, the elevated level of pulses inflation is worrisome and warrants timely and swift supply-side interventions, including a reappraisal of the import duties. Immediate step-up open market sales, PDS offtake by FCI to offload some part of excess stocks can also cool down cereal prices and also create room for Rabi procurement. Given the current global demand-supply balance, international crude oil prices, metals and industrial raw materials are likely to remain soft. This would ease input costs for domestic firms. Deficient demand may hold down pressure on core inflation, although persisting supply dislocations impart uncertainty to their near-term outlook. Much will depend on the shape of the recovery after COVID-19. Accordingly, the MPC is of the view that headline inflation may remain firm in the first half of 2020, but should ease in the second half, aided also by favorable base effects. By Q3 and Q4 of the current financial year, it is expected that the headline inflation will fall below the target of 4%. Thus, the MPC's forward guidance on inflation is directional rather than in terms of levels. Going forward, as and when more data are available, it should be possible to estimate the path of inflation with greater certainty. It is in the growth outlook that MPC judged the risks to be the gravest. The combined impact of demand compression and supply disruption will depress economic activity in the first half of the year. Assuming that economic activity gets restored in a phased manner, especially in the second half of this year, and taking into consideration favorable base effects, it is expected that the combination of fiscal, monetary and administrative measures being currently undertaken both by the government and the RBI would create conditions for a gradual revival in activity in the second half of 2021. Nonetheless, downside risks to this assessment are significant and contingent upon the containment of the pandemic and quick phasing out of social distancing and lockdowns. Given all these uncertainties, GDP growth in 2021 is estimated to remain in the negative territory, with some pickup in growth impulses in H2 2021 onwards. The end May 2020 release of NSO on national income should provide greater clarity, enabling more specific projections of GDP growth in terms of both magnitude and direction. Much will depend on how quickly the COVID curve flattens and begins to moderate. As the nation prepares for this future, the words of Mahatma Gandhi should inspire us to fight on. I quote, "We may stumble and fall, but shall rise again," unquote. The MPC is of the view that the macroeconomic impact of the pandemic is turning out to be more severe than initially anticipated. Beyond the destruction of economic and financial activity, livelihood and health are severely affected. Judging that the risks to growth are acute, while the risks to inflation are likely to be short-lived, the MPC believes that it is essential now to instill confidence and ease financial conditions further. This will facilitate flow of funds at affordable rates and rekindle investment impulses. It is in this context that the MPC voted to reduce the policy repo rate by 40 basis points from 4.4 to 4%. If the inflation trajectory evolves as expected, more space will open up to address the risks to growth. The regulatory and developmental measures which we announced, they are being done to complement and amplify the reduction in the policy repo rate decided by the MPC. As I have said earlier, the RBI has been constantly monitoring the situation. We are extremely careful, and the very level of vigilance is at its highest, is at its peak in RBI. Our entire team of officers are closely monitoring the developments in various segments of the economy, and you would have seen that over the past 2 or 3 months, as and when it was warranted, the RBI has not waited for a formal statement to be made by the governor, but we have been taking policy measures. As and when the situation warrants, to the best of our ability, we are reacting to situations, we are trying to anticipate and also trying to be proactive, and that shall continue to be under the underlying theme of our approach. In my statement at the time of MPC meeting in February 2020, I had pointed out the increasing downside risks to global growth in the context of the outbreak of coronavirus, the full effects of which were still uncertain and unfolding at that time, that is in the first week of February. Since then, RBI has proactively managed liquidity conditions, expanding its array of measures, both conventional and unconventional. In the meantime, the monetary policy transmission to banks' lending rates has also continued to improve significantly. I have some details about the transmission of policy rates in the various segments of the financial markets. I have also data about the transmission of the policy rate to the new fresh loans being sanctioned by the banks. The decision of the MPC to reduce the policy repo rate and maintain the accommodative stance of monetary policy provides the opportunity for the RBI to announce certain additional measures against the backdrop of a deteriorating outlook for economic activity. These policy actions complement and strengthen each other in intent and reach.
You were listening to a special interview of Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman with DD News, followed by press statement by RBI Governor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.